And I think it all starts with like sitting down with your child and communicating with them. My wife and Jake, they were kind of, shouting back and forth. My wife's doing the dishes, my son's at the dinner table, and it's like, this is not, because we run this business together too, my wife and I, it does me absolutely no good to come in here and like yell at Andrew about something, or for him to come in here and yell at me about something. We can't have an environment that's that way. It's just not productive. It's like, how is that going to advance anything? And it's hard to think that way sometimes with family members, because it does get emotional, and you're like, well, shit, why don't you just doing what you're supposed to be doing? But at the same time, I think that your children should be treated like adults. I think they're a lot smarter, a lot more intuitive than we give them credit for. And I think in a lot of cases, they're even way smarter than us. Like, they just know. It's almost like an animal instinct. It's like sometimes people like their dog knows when certain person's at the door and shit like that. I think kids have they pick up on everything. You cannot, we've had times in our family where something was going on, or somebody was sad or upset, and our kids would just be like, "Hey, what's wrong?" And you're like, "Fuck, man, I'm trying to disguise it the best I can, but I'm really falling apart over here," And they just know, man. They can sense things really well. So I think the main, like, where it all starts is to, sit down with that kid, or sit down with your own kid, whoever this person might be that doesn't want to do these things, and communicate with them and explain to them why. I think the best thing to do, honestly, is rather than trying to explain why it's important, because you're going to try to explain why it's important to you, is let the idea come from them. So what I told my son is, I said, let's forget everything for a second. Let's say that I'm your teacher. I'm your teacher, and I'm your teacher for all the classes that you're in now, all the subjects, right? I said, I'm gonna give you a blank piece of paper, and you can write down whatever grades that you want. What grades would you write? And he's like, A+. And I'm like, okay, let's just say that in order to get an A+, you'd have to play video games less. You couldn't film with your friends on the weekend, and you couldn't work out. He's like, well, then I wouldn't want an A+. I was like, okay, well, what if you can do some of those things? What if you can do some of those things, but you got like a B or a B-? He's like, I'd go for that. I was like, well, there we go. And then the conversation quickly changed to him talking about organization and how he's not organized, and how if he gets better organized, he thinks he could be more productive. And now he's actually like, this whole thing just took a giant 180. And it's not because I'm a genius, and it's not because anything my wife was doing was wrong. My wife is the one that deals with him every day on this stuff. She goes over it with him all the time. So she gets frustrated, which is totally normal. But it takes both of us. It takes both of us to steer the ship and to get him headed in the right direction. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to this probably have issues with their own kids trying to get their homework done.
Yeah, it's always tough. And like I've said on the podcast before, like my sister was having a little trouble with my nephew because he had the same thing as Jake, where he's like, why is this so, like, this doesn't matter. Like in the next couple of years, it's just not going to matter.
Dividing fractions? Like, what is this?
Yeah. Like,
this is ridiculous.
And so like I sat there and I'm like, dude, yeah, I hated school too, man. I didn't want to go, but if you don't finish high school, you're not going to finish anything. Like, cause it might seem like quite a bit of a chore right now, but once you get out of it, you'll realize, man, that actually wasn't hard at all. So, but it was funny because I'm like, yeah, it's kind of bullshit. And he just looked at me because no one had ever said that to him. But that's kind of like, again, like we can't treat our kids as kids all the time. I understand, like, yeah, you can, you shouldn't be yelling at them. You shouldn't have like crazy high expectations on certain things. But when it comes to telling them about like real life stuff, like, dude, forget the age. Like, you just need to tell him, like, he's a human being, right? Like, he's just a little bit smaller right now.
Yeah.
But when I was just real with him, I'm just like, yeah, dude, it does suck. It's kind of a waste right now. I'm like, but you have to get through it. And he kind of looked at me weird and then was like, all right. And so he's doing fine now. But it just took me looking at him and treating him like an adult for like when no one else would. And so that was huge.
Yeah, that respect makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think also too, what I was explaining to my son is like, I don't always want to go to the gym and like lift, but I love the result. So the result is what I'm obsessed with. The result is what I'm after. And so, even though like, I might be on my way here and I might be like, wow, like I don't know. I don't really even feel like training right now. But once I get here and I get warmed up, then I kind of start to remember why. I start to remember what's the reason behind all this. Why am I doing these things? And same thing with my wife. My wife gets up every morning at like 5 or 6 o'clock, and she swims every morning. And she does love to swim, but even just because you love something doesn't mean you don't hate it sometimes, and it doesn't mean it's not an inconvenience. I mean, even your own partner, even your own person that you live with or spend the rest of your life with, even as much as you love them, you're going to hate them sometimes. That's the way things are, right? The yin and yang to everything. But I think it's trying to figure out, what's the result. And so that's a hard thing when it comes to, school. It's like, I can give him this like speech and get him fired up, but it's like, how long will that sustain? Will that stay? Will that actually really, really stick? And I think that it will over time, because I'm teaching him stuff that, I wish I heard some of these things when I was, I sent him, I sent him a message, or sent him a video that I watched with Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs talked about dropping out of school. He dropped out of college, not out of high school. But the cool thing about Steve Jobs and the cool thing about Bill Gates is both of them dropped out of college, but they both stayed in school and still went to classes, which is like really insane.
Yeah.
And so you talk about, educo, this idea of these things coming from within. They dropped out, but then they dropped in on the classes that they liked. They went to but they didn't want to adhere to the standard form of education of, this is the curriculum that you need to know. You need to know all these different courses as well. They're like, screw that. I'm just going to go to the stuff that I want. And that's how they ended up becoming some of the richest people in the history of the planet.
I mean, don't you wonder why it's like, why can't you necessarily do that? If you're a student that, you're paying for college and I want to learn about this and these things, and what classes you want to take to do that, can't you just do those classes and do those classes only?
You can't.
I know you can, but just like, why?
Because the prerequisites and the money involved with credits and
it gets to be
the time that you have to.
But I think that if you were to give kids a lot of choices, I think, if you did that all the time, I think over a period of time they would choose stuff that's good for them. Obviously, if you said, "Hey, you want ice cream," and then 20 minutes later said you want ice cream, they're going to keep wanting ice cream. That's not really what I mean, but I think that if you said, hey, you got the option to play outside right now, or you can read, or you can go over some math, they'd probably be like, I can play outside.
Mm-hmm.
They come back, you'd probably be tired. You got the option to read, go outside, and they might go outside a bunch, but I bet you eventually they're going to be like, yeah, let's do some addition and subtraction. Let's go for it. I bet you that and that's what they do at a lot of these other schools. Some of these like Montessori schools and stuff like that, they let you kind of take your time with your education. They'll, if some kid is like being disruptive in class, then they'll just be like, hey, everybody, let's go outside. Let's get 10 minutes outside and we're going to come back. Or if you wanted to, pick something in particular that's a little different to learn, they might just kind of like go over that. Like they might stop what they're doing and go over something a little different, which is kind of an interesting form of education,
Yeah. On that idea of education, what's crazy? I mean, I got a lot of friends that, like from high school and college, where they're in their job that they have in their major. I've had the discussion with a few people, and it's often that I find that they're like, yeah, I don't really read much anymore, dude, or I'm not really doing anything new. I'm not learning about anything new. Pretty much just going to work. Maybe I'll hit a workout, come home, watch some TV, and go do that same thing. And it's so crazy to me because, like, I can't imagine at this point not trying to learn something new, I feel like if I did end up in the job that I wanted to go into from college, and I was like comfortable with that job, like that education for me wouldn't, like, I wouldn't enjoy continuing to learn about it, right? But I'd already be in that job. And if it's set and I don't really like learning about it, but I'm already making that money, I don't think I'd really put myself out to do many more new things or learn much more new stuff. And
No.
that's sad to think about.
No, I mean, I had that job. Well, not the job I went to college for or whatever, but I had the job that I thought was like my career, and you're like, oh, I finally made it. You want to do everything that has nothing to do with your job at that point, because it's just like the same redundancy stuff over and over every single day, monotonous, and you're collecting a paycheck at a certain point.
Yeah.
Maybe I was a terrible employee that thought that, but that's just the way it was. And anytime I clocked out, it was literally anything else. Like, it was like, oh, let's read up on the Kings, let's 49ers, and then eventually, luckily, I started falling in love with photography, and that's when I started learning, but somewhere else, right? Like, it was a totally different thing, and that's like I said, thank goodness that happened. But as far as like my job itself, like I tried in the beginning. It was in the medical outfield, I'll say, because it was medical records.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, oh yeah, let me try to take advantage of any kind of education that this company is going to provide. And so like I did like medical terminology courses and all kinds of stuff. And all it got me was like a 15-minute break away from my job, because I would have to go take these classes online. And like I got a certificate at the end of it all, and it was kind of lame. But no, you're right. Like I had zero ambition to try to do anything better other than just what was required for me at that position. And it was terrible.
I find it really fascinating that people do stop their education. I was never a fan of school, but I've always been a fan of education. Like it's important to learn shit. Like, so for me, school was hard, and I just didn't have a great time with it. But it doesn't mean that it sucks for everybody, and it doesn't mean the idea of like learning stuff is bad. Like, we have to learn in order to grow. Louis Simmons used to talk about this a lot, and he would say, if you were on a deserted island and all you ever read was one book, that's all you would really know. And he compared that to training. If you that would be the stimulus that you had was, you just did sets of 10 your whole life and you used the same weight. Well, then you're just going to get the same old result. You don't have the ability to grow because there's nothing to adapt to. You still lift the same 45-pound bar and you do it 10 times every day for 3 sets. It's going to just yield that result, and it's not going to further stimulate you.
Mm-hmm. Same
thing with the idea of this one book. It's just the one thing. What I find really interesting is that somebody that's, in a 9-to-5 won't like their job. They'll feel underpaid and overworked. They'll be frustrated, and they'll also think to themselves, they'll look at the guy to the left and look at the guy to the right and be like, man, I'd love to be like that. Man, look at that boat that guy has next door. Man, that boat is sick. And then then they go inside their house and they watch TV. And it's like, why aren't we asking the question, and people hate to talk about money, but it seems like idiotic almost to not sit down and think to yourself for a second, maybe grab a notebook and just write it down in giant letters. Say, how do I make more money? How do I get that fucking boat that the guy next door has? That thing looks sweet. Mm-hmm. I want to figure it out. Well, the way that you're going to get that is to figure it out. There's nothing more powerful in the world than a made up mind. You make up your mind to do something and you're determined to go for it, you're going to end up with something. You're not going to end up with nothing. You're going to end up with something. Like, I tried the 500-pound bench this weekend. I ended up with 485. I ended up with something.
Yeah.
I got some points on the scoreboard, right? You're not going to end up with nothing.
Yeah, you got your name on the board.
Got my name on the board. Got to erase Damon Thurman off there. But it really boggles the mind. It's like, what about a self-help book? What about a seminar? What about a podcast? There's so many resources. It's like, man, what did you just do? You're just marveling at the guy's house next door or what the guy had next door. And then you just went inside and didn't think to yourself that maybe you could be better. Like don't wish for things to be better. Like, wish for you to have more skill. Mm-hmm. Wish for you to be better.
Yeah.
What you should be praying for.
Yeah. What you said earlier about, putting in the work, it gives you more options than if you didn't. I don't know if that would have stuck, but I wish somebody would have told me that when I was like just getting out of high school, because I didn't understand. Okay, come on, throat. I didn't understand.
Sucking that dick.
I know, right? Ugh. I hope my mom's not watching. She's just going to be so upset with me right now.
She's just going to be like, I knew it.
My dad's going to be like, this makes so much sense. Anyway, I didn't understand that. All I knew was like I just got to work hard. So I'm going to drop out of college and I'm just going to go get not one, but 2 jobs. And to my parents, they were like, oh, okay, well, yeah, you're just a hard worker. Like, that's fine. Go ahead and work 2 jobs. Now, there were 2 shitty jobs, but I always had something to do, but I always had to do something, like, meaning like I never had money. I never had anything. I never had options to stop working. Yeah. I always had to have a job, but had I not been such a dumbass in school, then maybe I would have had more options. However, what I've been telling myself, there definitely is no mistakes. There's no regrets whatsoever, because everything that I did helped get me here. However, if there was a little bit smoother road to get here, or maybe, I don't know, more fruitful road, there's the dick sucking again. It might have been different, but it's just, like I said, it's, there's no mistakes, but there are definitely life lessons that I learned for sure. And I wish I had known that, like, yeah, if you put in the work, you're going to have more options. I think that's huge. I really like that.
Yeah, that was something I said off air.
Mm-hmm.
We had a little discussion beforehand about some of the things we were going to talk about, and I mentioned how I explained to my son, like if you choose to do some of the things that you don't really want to do now, then you'll have more choices later on. So yeah, like, this does suck, but the more that you lean into that, and the more that you choose that, the more that you end up with what you want, and the more, in some sense, the more freedom that you can get away from having to be so strict or so rigid or adhere to really anything anyone else says or does. I hung out with my friend yesterday that owns Dutch Brothers, my boy Sean. He and I trained this morning.
Oh.
I had him. We met yesterday for a little bit and got some conversation. He was like, "Man, I need to get back in the gym," and he kind of had a laundry list of excuses out that he was going over with me. And he was like, "I can't, work out in the morning because my wife works out in the morning." I was like, "Oh, what time does she work out?" He's like, "She goes at like 6:30. I said, "I'll see you at the gym at 4." And so he and I trained this morning. He actually threw up because he hasn't trained in a long time.
Oh, wow.
But this is a guy, that puts in the work. This is a guy that years ago, I actually remember him saying this to me. He used to train with me before SuperTraining was SuperTraining. So he's been around the entire time and he's seen all this stuff going on. But I remember him saying to me, like, he's like, "I'm working on stuff right now. It's not going to pay off for like 5, 6, 7 years." Most people aren't willing to say that. Most people aren't willing to even think that way. And now he's doing great. Now he's got 6 Dutch brothers. I think he's working on a 7th one. He's got 4 awesome children. He's got everything and anything. I mean, he's got every toy and trinket that you can possibly think of. He's got a Tesla. He's got these big ass trucks and a bunch of other cool things. Just a wonderful person, awesome guy. But what a great mentality that is, right? Like, the work I'm putting in right now might not seem like much, and I might not be getting much back yet. But wait a couple years, because that shit's going to be coming.